joining me here is former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Elie Honig, and former federal prosecutor Elliot Williams. So, Elie, I'm going to start with you. The 2 counts that he was found guilty of, as we've been saying, they're certainly not the most significant, serious charges that he was facing.
Yeah.
But they're not nothing.
They're not nothing, but they're not much either. I mean, in the scheme of this case, the 3 counts where Sean Combs was found not guilty, the racketeering and the 2 forcible sex trafficking counts, those were existential threats. I mean, if Sean Combs had been convicted of either of them, he may well have spent the rest of his life behind bars. He definitely, automatically would have spent at least 15 years behind bars. There's no way to spin this other than a massive victory for Sean Combs and a massive setback for the Southern District of New York. It's a good reminder. Juries surprise us all the time. Juries can be discerning. They went count by count here. They didn't just sort of sweep the table and say all guilty, all not guilty. They made very fine distinctions between mere interstate prostitution, which they found him guilty of, and on the other hand, forcible sex trafficking, which they found him not guilty of. So Sean Combs, Kara just said Sean Combs' legal team was exulting and celebrating. They deserve it. They pulled out a miraculous outcome for their client.
And Elliot, on those charges that he was acquitted of, the most serious, racketeering and sex trafficking, the racketeering conspiracy was the most difficult to prove. But on both, generally, as somebody who has prosecuted cases, what was missing from their case?
Well, it's hard to say what was missing. It's certainly what I think the jury had trouble with. Now, let's take them both separately. On the racketeering, prosecutors would have had to establish the existence of a criminal enterprise, even an informal one, not necessarily an incorporated business, but certainly something concrete whereby this is the person who's the muscle, this is the person who gets the drugs, this is the person who beats people up, and this is how our sex acts are protected here. That's a big leap from isolated acts of whether they were sexual assault or isolated acts of prostitution. Putting them under that big umbrella was just going to be hard. And much of the commentary, frankly, even from the 2 of us since the beginning of this, Laura Coates has been saying this a lot on air as well. Much of the commentary has been, it would have been quite challenging to establish that racketeering conspiracy. On the sex trafficking, the biggest problem, and this comes up in sexual assault and harassment cases all the time, is this question of the consent of the survivor of the victim. And those text messages that came up in court were not very good for the prosecution. By way of example, one of them, Jane, one of the victims, Sean Combs texts her and says, "Are we getting freaky tonight?" referring to these freak-offs, and she responds, "Yeah, OFC, of course." Now, again, there's far more in the record than that, but what you have in a text electronic format is a victim consenting to a sex act with the defendant. You had that throughout the relationship. These were complex, fraught, ugly, violent relationships, but also ones in which, yes, they were consensual relationships, and I think the jury got hung up on that.
And Ellie, let's talk about what we're waiting for right now. And again, it's 12:10 Eastern. The judge says that he will make a decision by 1, which is in the next 50 minutes or so. So we're on pins and needles right now to see whether or not Sean Diddy Combs is released on bail.
Do not be surprised if at some point this afternoon we see Sean Combs walking out those doors right there, and here's why. Let's take the celebrity factor out of this. If this was not Sean Combs, if this was just some run-of-the-mill unknown New Yorker who had only been convicted of what we call the Mann Act, of non-forcible interstate prostitution, he would walk today. Because Sean Combs has been behind bars for nearly a year. He was arrested last summer, and he has been locked up since then without bail. And so the likely sentence the judge would calculate is going to be probably something in the realm of time served, meaning the year or so that he's already served. The judge may impose a little more than that, but the judge is going to be thinking, okay, the whole math here has now changed. The most serious offenses, the 15-year minimums, the RICO, the life max, they're off the table. And so I'm not going to make a prediction, but I am also, my jaw's not going to be on the floor if Sean Combs walks out of that courthouse in a couple hours.
So you think, and do you agree with this, that it is possible, take the bail question out, but when it comes to sentencing, that he will only get time served?
He could only get time served because he's already been in for close to a year, if not a little more than a year.
So it's maximum 10, but is there a minimum?
Maximum 10.
No minimum.
There's no mandatory
No
minimum
minimum.
like there would have been on the sex trafficking count. Now, again, we got to get out of our minds this idea of 20 years in prison.
Right.
That is if you were to take what the law says and stack both cases on top of each other. One, it's highly unlikely that a judge would do that. And two, virtually nobody gets the full statutory amount. And three, based on criminal history, the nature of the offense and so on, it is highly unlikely that someone would get even close to the statutory maximum. Now, he'll be sentenced in probably a few months. There's a complicated process whereby both parties submit what they think he should get, and it's really up to the judge. But, to be clear, and this is sort of what we were talking about a second ago, he's not going to jail for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
He could certainly get some jail time, but it is highly unlikely. And again, not going to be 20 years, not.
Just quickly, in both of your experience in the courtroom, how much does the judge take outside factors into? I know they're not supposed to, but they're human, and they also are people of the world. Outside factors meaning the focus on this. I mean, you heard Laura saying it's this generation's OJ trial. How much, and obviously there are a lot of differences there, but just when it comes to a celebrity facing a lot of time in prison, or at least before.
Judges are not supposed to take those factors into account outside of the courtroom. They can, and they do sometimes, but I want to say this. Judges feel burned. When you overcharge a case like this, as the prosecutors have, and when prosecutors have convinced you as a judge to lock this guy up pre-trial, and then you get busted on your trial verdict like this, the judge is not going to take that well.
But one quick point. There are places where the judge is empowered to consider outside factors. For instance, if the person abuses a position of responsibility or trust, if the person abuses a vulnerable victim, there's any number of factors that aren't just specific to what the things they were charged with that a judge can and quite frankly should consider, and some of that may come in here. Now, pretrial publicity may not be the kind of thing, that was your question.
Yeah.
But no, there's other stuff that the judge will have in the back of his mind when administering the sentence, I think.
I always learn so much from both of you. Thank you so much. I want to bring in Lisa Respers-France. She covers entertainment for us, and she joins us from Atlanta. Lisa, Combs' trial has spawned its own trialtainment industry, dominated by podcasts, influencers. What has the reaction been there, the immediate reaction to this verdict?
Well, of course, Dana, there's the legal court and then there's the court of public opinion. And immediately following this, there was a lot of shock. This has been a very divisive case, as is always the case whenever there's a celebrity involved. You have the fan base, many of whom don't want to believe that someone that they enjoyed their art so tremendously could be guilty of anything. So you have some people who are very surprised, and then you have some anger. You have some people who say that they feel as though this is yet another case of a rich and powerful man who was up for justice and then escaped justice. But as we see, the jury did their job. They determined what they determined, and we have to go from there.
And you have reported on past trials that have captured the nation's attention, the O.J. Simpson trial in particular. I know you were writing for the LA Times back during that trial. The cases could not be more different, but when it comes to the public, sort of the zeitgeist, what similarities do you see?
There's absolutely the similarity of race being a big part of that. I think it's fair to say that I don't think Sean Diddy Combs enjoyed the same support among the black community that O.J. Simpson did at the time, but in both cases they involved allegations of domestic violence, but also I think both men became surrogates for what could happen in the criminal justice system when you have a black man in particular who's able to, in a way, level the playing field because they could afford really good attorneys, they could afford to have the best representation, and so that factors into it. Not only were they both black celebrities, but when it comes to having black men accused of crimes in this country, a lot of times there's this feeling of, finally you have someone who's able to get the type of defense that is available to a non-person of color. And so that's always a part of the conversation. And I've written about this before when it's come to the R. Kellys of the world, the Bill Cosbys of the world, the Michael Jacksons of the world, the O.J. Simpsons, and now the Sean Diddy Combs. They become representative of what can happen in the justice system and the judicial system for someone who can afford to have the very best representation. And
you heard Cassie Ventura's lawyer responding to how the defense characterized their relationship, her relationship with Combs. He also told CNN that Cassie would continue to fight for survivors. What about that part of this case?
Interestingly enough, earlier I called into the Atlanta radio station V103 here they wanted to ask me a few questions about this case, and I heard from some of the callers prior to me a lot of victim shaming. So while, Cassie Ventura, we were able to see actual evidence of some of her allegations, we were able to see, thanks to the video that we broke here at CNN, her being physically assaulted. There still is a great deal of victim shaming that happens. One woman that called in the V103 basically hailed and said, "I have sons, I know what it's like. These women try to bring these powerful men down." And unfortunately, that's the sentiment among some people. Some people, support Cassie and they hail her because we know, and it's very clear, that there would have probably been no trial had she not come forward. So, there's still people that this was a difficult case, and there's still people who are divided, even now that we have a verdict.
Yeah, that victim shaming is really unfortunate. Lisa, thank you so much. Appreciate your perspective.